So welcome to Bilateral Bytes, this time focusing on India and the next 25 years. We're fortunate enough to have with us Professor Rajendra Pratap Gupta. He is the author of Tough Choices and Hard Decisions over the next 25 years. Professor Rajendra Pratap Gupta has just recently been appointed as the chairman of the drafting committee for digital health standards as well. And prior to that has been a fundamental influencer of policy in the Modi government, particularly on education and on health, but across multiple sectors. So, Professor Gupta, it's a pleasure to have you with us here today.
My pleasure as well, Tanya. Good to speak to you.
I'm fascinated that you managed to produce a book in 10 days flat. That's extraordinary, but much needed. So your recent book, Tough Choices and Hard Decisions, was published just days before Prime Minister Modi's announcement on the 12th of May about a self-reliant India in the 21st century. He spoke of the COVID crisis making India more self-reliant as an essential element of India's domestic policy agenda, and went on to outline 5 pillars. These were economy, infrastructure, system, vibrant demography, and demand. Could you perhaps shed a little bit of light on what is meant by these, and in particular system in the context of either a domestic or international system in the Indian context?
Yeah, thanks, Tanya. See, if you look at India as a country, we have 1.35 billion people, and a very interesting stage we are in right now. And in a country, the most important thing is economy. So if you even see the prioritization of his, agenda of economy comes first. If you are a strong economy, then you get into the next level of saying, okay, I can do so many things. Economy is based on the strength of infrastructure you hold, whether it is soft or whether it is hard. If you have to build infrastructure, you need a system. And the system is all about governance. It is where he's saying we will need a system to run a country for 21st century. So I think there'll be a fundamental relook at what we need to change to make it more people-oriented, to make it more development-oriented, to be a fast-track adaptable to what India needs as of now. So that's where the system comes in. If you look at demographics, so India as a country, we have a lot of time this being said that we are on the side of demographic dividend. The next 25 years, we're going to be with that. So we are a young country with an average age of 29 years, 65% of the population below 35 years in age. So I think this is where our demography is. And if you look at the demography, what does it mean? We can look at a huge demand surge. These are the generation of people who will look at creating a demand-based economy. So I think very rightly he has articulated the strengths, the priorities, and the focus areas for action for the government. And that's where it leads to what we call a self-reliant India. That's what it finally leads to as a goal. Yeah.
No, that makes good sense, and one clearly builds on the other. Taking your point about all of these really, but in particular, I guess the vibrant demography and the fact that we have a relatively young population in India. You've been very influential in education. You wrote a book last year called Your Degree Is Not Enough. You were also on the committee of the new education policy to draft the new education policy, which I think might see the light of day coming into fruition in the second half of this year. Education is obviously key to harnessing the youth of India. Could you tell us a little bit more about education and how that fits into the 5 pillars?
So if you look at what are the goals that have been set for the country, if you're looking at short term, we'll have to look at the stimulus part, which I think government has done a fairly good job of saying this is the stimulus of 10% of the GDP. But if you look at long term, India will have to invest in R&D, science, and that cannot happen without investing in education. Our education model needs to reorient itself to the changing needs of the time. We are at an action point where we have a huge population. We have 16 to 18 million people getting in new every year. So the education system will move from what it was earlier to what it is now. So if you look at the history of education, 1991, we just had 83 crore people. And now we have 60% more. So since India got liberalized, we have grown our population to 60% from what it is. So the needs of the country have changed. more than the needs, the aspiration of the young India has changed. I think that is what the education will look at. So you are seeing a massive shift in which we are moving from, the curriculum to competence, from
Yeah.
mere, theoretical education to skill-oriented vocational education. So I think the major focus for India at this time, fitting into the 5 pillars of what our Honorable Prime Minister outlined, is based on fundamental investments in education and R&D. That will take us to a stage where we'll become an innovator. That's what I think we need to change in education. And I think the education policy as it comes will be in tune with what the Prime Minister has envisioned for the country.
In fact, in part of the new education policy draft, it looks at both the internationalization of education as well as being more liberal in terms of online education. Do you think both of those are integral in part to moving towards India as an innovator?
That's very true. And very rightly you have put it that these are not separate things. As a working professional, as a person into a job, I would need to reskill and upskill myself. So that can happen when I'm doing at self-paced learning. I can't go back and spend time in, maybe university or something. So I think online education becomes very core to that. And internationalization is very important because if we are looking at par with the best, probably even better than what the globe offers today. So on that side, I think, yes, there's a concerted effort to get, the best of the best in the country, at the same time to upgrade our existing educational institutes. So I think both are a right fit in terms of a long-term vision for education.
Yes, I would agree. I think those are very good points. Because I know that you're an international speaker and have often been invited by the United Nations, including by the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, I also just wanted to ask you about Digital India and online education. So India has celebrated that more than half the population, around 600 million people or more or less, are now online. What does that mean in terms of access and equity to education and innovation? And are we looking at an increasing digital divide that could harm, the demographic growth of the country? Or is Digital India in fact part of the infrastructure of the 5 pillars that we're talking about in the 21st century?
So if you look at, Tanya, how our Honorable Prime Minister, when he assumed office, outlined his vision of Digital India. So his vision is that Digital India should be an enabler. And, over time, government has also said that we want to build a digital economy worth 1 trillion. So it is interlinked. So on one side, we want to use education, and we are talking of broadband to the level of villages, which is the lowest level, at which one can reach to be with the grassroots. So we are not leaving rural India or urban India as two separate tranches. So there is the Universal Service Obligation Fund, where the revenues have to be utilized for deploying in rural India. So on one side, there will be investments in rural India, broadband at the level of villages, complete coverage. So that will take rural, the internet and broadband to the rural areas. If you look at the rates over the last 6 years, we have probably gone down drastically compared to where the world is in terms of broadband charges, in terms of data charges. And government has planned in terms of how to use education through MOOCs. And even if you saw the announcement of the Honorable Finance Minister, she said that, we're looking at having digital courses, and we have given approval to 100 universities to start digital courses. So I think there's a complete picture in mind. There's a national skills mission. So if you club everything, I think we have not left out probably anything that comes to mind when you look at Digital India, education, skills, and employment. So I think looks like a complete plan. We'll see as we go through it. Yeah.
Yeah, and in fact, you're quite right. The Honourable Finance Minister Sitaraman said this well before the COVID scare during her budget speech in February. Indeed, that's promising. Turning now to health, you were the advisor to former Health Minister Nada and one of the architects of the National Health Policy 2017, which quite rightly focused on strengthening primary health care. And hopefully we're seeing some of those benefits now. However, unlike education, which is enshrined as a fundamental right in the Indian constitution, health, while very important, and after some debates, has not yet been enshrined as a fundamental right into Indian law. Is now a time rather to revisit that?
So Tanya, let's look at the practicality. If you look at the national health policy, if you look at the PMJY, which is our flagship insurance program, so one thing has happened. We are talking in the health policy of health and wellness centers, which will have not just the basic services. We have talked about whole gamut of services, which includes even testing of chronic diseases and all. So look at this side. Your very important question about universal health coverage and health for all. As I see it, practically it is guaranteeing the right to health for primary care. So everyone has free access of primary care in government facilities. You look at practically we have done that. A lot of people talk about putting rules, regulations. Actually, there's a program which is practically everyone has free access to primary health. That being said, for the most vulnerable population and for the poor or lower middle class, 50 crore plus people have access to this 5 lakh insurance cover, which is actually like right to health, if you call it. So if one has critical illness, one has illnesses, broadly everything is covered under this. So they are all insured by the government. For a country of our size and a GDP per capita of $2,300 into a lower middle income country, I think this is a great accomplishment. And this is just the start. You're not saying we'll stop at this.
Sure.
If you build on this, this will extend more over a period of time. So this all is a direct relation to, our growth. Our commitment is there. Growth helps facilitate, extend this to larger masses. So I think we have not shied. I think we have made it health for all in terms of the primary care. It is actually guaranteed today. One can walk into a primary health and wellness center and get all the checkups done. And, there are doctors. So that part is done. And so I think over time, we will have that health for all as well, for everyone.
You make the good point as well, Rajendra, that in order to be able to provide for essential health and education, an economy still needs to have a healthy economy in order to provide for that. In your book, you highlight that an economic growth of 16% per annum is needed to get India from a lower middle income country into a superpower during the 21st century. And that's year on year, I believe, over the next 25 years you outline in your book. I wanted to ask you, on what basis are you thinking that India can grow to 16%, given it's now at around, well, it was projected at around 4% before COVID, and now at around 1% or less because of the corona crisis leading to the economic crisis? And secondly, would an economic growth of 16% be commensurate with a commitment to environment and sustainability?
Okay, so on what basis do I commit? I'll answer that most important part of the question. So I looked at 3 things. One is, where does the world economy stand? So if you look at that chart where I put this, is that I have looked at the growth of OECD countries, I have looked at the world average, I have looked at the upper middle income countries, the developed countries. That's one part. So and I have also assumed that the global economy is growing at 3% year on year. So accordingly, I have looked at GDP per capita and the growth that we require for that. So my inference is that if we want to be a developed nation over 25 years, and which is very specific why I mentioned only 25 years, not 20 or 30, our demographic dividend is going to last only for 25 years. So whatever we want to achieve, we should achieve in that 25 years. This is the best time. So if you have to do it in 25 years, so I looked at and calculated the growth of GDP per capita. I've never talked of GDP, I've talked of GDP per capita if you very specifically look into that chart. The minimum growth we require is 15.8% per annum on GDP per capita to grow and become a developed country over the next 25 years. That was one calculation. The other calculation is very, very important and simple for us. So in my previous book, I had analyzed, based on the World Bank data, that for every % growth in GDP, India creates 750,000 jobs. And if you look at our requirement, we require 1 million jobs a month. So just do the calculation simple. If you want to get 12 million jobs, we need to grow at 16%. So look at both the data sets, 15.81 versus 16. And do we have a choice? Because we will have to provide employment and job to every person getting into the economy. So I think it's a Hobson's. We don't have much leeway. We will have to grow at 16%. The second part of your question, can we grow? Of course, yes, we can. Because we have the resources, we have the manpower, we have the vision, and the only thing we require is to fit what Prime Minister has said, all the 5 pillars, put a new system and keep growing. I know you're very pro-environment, which is very critical for humanity, not just for economy. So at one point in my book, I put a tough choice, which is energy versus energy conservation, right? And renewable energy. So over 25 years, we would be consuming more power because of electric vehicles and air conditioners. Mm-hmm. As simple as that. We're talking about electrical vehicles for a population of 1.6 billion plus at that time. Our requirement will be much more than United States and European Union. So in that context, in a renewable energy and conservation will save us 40% of our needs at that time. So we will have to balance our carbon footprint along with our investments for energy requirement for growing India at 16%. And I don't think we can separate economy and environment. That's why at one time I mentioned health index replacing our GDP, which talks about healthy indicators, education, environment, longevity, and health. So I think this is where we will have to look at holistically in terms of growing economy. And that's why I call it economic development, not economic growth. That's the focus.
Yeah, it makes very good sense, and I think ties in nicely with Prime Minister Modi's human-centric vision, and more importantly with his point that India really respects Earth as mother. This was actually a point he made in his speech. Because for India in particular, I think 2/3 of the cities are the most polluted in the world, and lower pulmonary tract infection and upper pulmonary tract infection are the 2 of the top 10 killers in India, sadly, which means also it's impacting labor, it's impacting health, it's impacting a number of things. So great to hear that green frontier jobs, as well as more readily available renewable energy, could bring India into superpowerdom in the coming future. We've discussed a number of policies, and I know that your book foresees a number of reforms on the horizon. Obviously, digital health is something you're a part of. The new education policy has been in the wings for some time. The data protection bill has been in the wings for some time. What do you see as the 2020 reforms we might expect to see coming out of Prime Minister Modi's announcement last week?
So essentially, if you look at, there is a complete redoing in terms of how we look at people, processes, and the outcome of things. So I think it will be more outcome driven than process driven. That's where he talks about system rather than people centric. In people centric, when I say is that administration should not be run on an individual centric basis. It should be system driven. So I think we will see a lot of proactive steps on that. So whether it's financing, liquidity, growth, interface with the public, or reforms needed as and when. So I think the best part of the Modi government is he has changed the status quo. Earlier we used to wait for changes. He drives them, and he makes sure that things are action oriented. So every idea he will convert into a program and action it. Mm-hmm. That's the big difference he has brought to the administration. He's brought urgency to the administration, which was never there before. I'm going to see a lot of reforms. I think it's not going to be just 1 year. It's going to be all throughout that. He doesn't sit and he's restless till he brings that change. So I like the best part about him.
Well, that's great. Thank you so much for your time, Rajendra. And I had the fortune of downloading your book. I think it's a terrific read, and you've put it together in a very short time. Not only does it give an insight into where India is and where India could go if we have a chance to restart now, you also make the very interesting point that Prime Minister Modi is in fact the second Prime Minister that has a chance to truly restart India. Nehru had the chance to rebuild India during 1947, and Modi post-COVID has the chance to rebuild India in a very complex environment now. So you compel you make a very compelling argument, highlighting the ILO, World Bank, collating a number of figures together to give a very good picture of not just India, but India in the global context. So thank you very much. It's been very insightful, and hopefully I get to see you in India before too long.
Thank you, Tanya. It's good talking to you, and thanks for having me with you. I'm so privileged. Thank you.
Thanks very much.